Have you ever wondered how artists create different effects with watercolor? Picture the first technique, washes. These are large, sweeping brushstrokes that cover vast areas of paper with color. Imagine three distinct types of washes. A flat wash, which is a smooth, even application of color across the paper surface. A graded wash, transitioning gradually from dark to light, or vice versa. And a variegated wash, showcasing subtle variations in color intensity or hue. Now, envision a technique called dry brush. This involves using a brush with minimal water and thick paint to create textured broken marks. It's a favorite among artists when depicting rough surfaces, textures, or fine details. Next, consider the wet-on-wet technique. This involves applying wet paint onto a wet paper surface, allowing colors to blend and diffuse freely. This technique creates soft, atmospheric effects and smooth transitions between colors. Contrast this with the wet-on-dry technique. Here, wet paint is applied onto a dry paper surface, resulting in more defined, crisp brush strokes and edges. This technique is perfect for creating details and sharp lines. Delve into the world of glazing next. This involves applying transparent layers of color over dried paint layers to modify the hue, value, or intensity of the underlying colors. It gives artists the ability to build up depth and richness in their paintings. Next, imagine the splattering technique. This involves flicking or splattering paint onto the paper surface using a loaded brush, toothbrush, or other tools. It creates spontaneous textural marks reminiscent of splashes, spatters, or natural patterns. Picture the lifting technique. This involves removing wet or dry paint from the paper surface using a clean, damp brush, sponge, or tissue. It's a handy technique to create highlights, correct mistakes, or add texture by selectively lifting off paint. Then there's the dry into wet technique. This involves applying dry paint onto a wet paper surface. This technique allows for sharper, more defined brushstrokes and details compared to wet on wet, as the paint interacts with the moist paper surface. Imagine the sgraffito technique. This involves scratching or etching into wet or dry paint layers to reveal the underlying paper or previous layers of color. It's a great technique to create fine lines, textures, or highlights. Finally, consider the masking technique. This involves covering areas of the paper surface with masking fluid or tape before applying paint. Once the paint dries, the masking material is removed to reveal untouched areas of paper, creating crisp, white highlights or clean edges. These are just a few examples of the many marks and techniques that can be achieved with watercolor painting. Artists often experiment with different techniques and combinations to create unique and expressive artworks. So next time you see a watercolor painting, remember the many techniques that might have been used to create it. With a little practice and patience, you too could master these techniques and create your own watercolor masterpiece.